Okay. So yeah, so the topic today is working from home and some of the tools and workflows that Vectorworks can facilitate that process for us. And this is from the perspective of our small office, obviously, where there are a total of 4 of us, and all of us are working from home, and so we're having to figure out ways to do that effectively. And at least from my perspective, it hasn't actually been a huge jolt. Obviously, there's the definitely miss having people in the same space and having the kinds of conversations that enable design to happen, and kind of a good workspace. But in terms of our workflow or our work processes, those have not been radically impacted. Anyway, so the first thing I wanted to do is talk about the Redline tool, which I've been using a fair amount of. So the Redline tool has actually been around for quite a while. And I'm using a custom workspace, but my Redline tool is tucked away here below my text tool. So my text tool normally lives right here in this palette, and then the Redline tool is right there. And it's a pretty simple tool, and there's a couple of things to kind of know about it to really make it work for you. Essentially, the idea is would highlight some portion of your drawing, right? And you would go ahead and mark it up in some way. And so you can either mark it up with an oval or a polygon or freehand. I kind of like just using a rectangle, but it's all up to you. And then you have this Redline settings or preferences, which is this little crossed pencil and wrench, which we see. And there's a couple of Redline styles. So the rectangle can have the path can be a rectangle, but it could have sort of a revision cloud look, or it could be radiused or dashed or whatever. I just do a simple dashed. The Redline tool is the Redline is marked up by someone, it's authorized, and then it's assigned to someone. So I'm just going to authorize it by me, and I don't know, I'll just assign it to XYZ. And I want to do that at the beginning of my redlining session, because if I don't do it at the beginning, it's always going to default to these triple question marks, which is not so useful. So all I do is I just draw a little rectangle here, right? And then this little Redline note pops up, and so I can just go ahead and annotate, and I'll just write, let's oh yeah, embarrassing typos. There we go. And I'll hit OK. And so now here's this lovely little note. It has the day when I assigned it. It's authorized by me. And I've noticed that as I'm going through this project, that in our detail, we're showing the door detail as a slab door. And in fact, it's a panel door. And so it would be nice if the detail reflected the actual selection. So there it is. And then when XYZ goes and starts drawing and makes whatever change needs to be made to the detail, I'm just going to sort of fake this in right now, right? So they do their drawing, maybe change some line weights, whatever. So they draw the door, and they correct it, and then after they've corrected it, then over here in the object info palette, right, you can see that there is a little checkbox that says picked up. Right? And so XYZ will click, I've picked it up, and as you can see, the red line doesn't go away, doesn't get deleted, it just turns yellow, which is super cute. Carmine pencil, and you've highlighted it, and you want to keep these around, right? So that at the end of the day, you can go through and you can see what red lines have been picked up and what red lines have not, and so that's very useful. So a couple of things about the tool that I also want to point out. One is, it's a little hard to see in the yellow. One is that you can attach a sketch as part of the red line. So for example, I might do a quick and dirty sketch like this, and then with that selected, I might draw the red line again, and I'll just type the word note. And you see that I have attached the current selection as a sketch. So whatever is selected will be attached as the sketch. And it gets sort of hoovered into the red line so that when the red line is picked up, it also gets yellowed out and it's actually sort of part of the red line. But you'll notice that of the two rectangles that I drew, only one of them got made as part of the sketch. Kind of a limitation of the tool. So there is a workaround for that, and that is that before I do my red line, if I have multiple objects that I want to include as part of the sketch, I would just go ahead and group them and then go ahead and do my red line. So sketch, group, then red line. The other thing to point out is attach the current selection as a sketch is always deselected as a default. So even if you did that, the last red line that you did, the next one, it'll be deselected again. It's not a sticky feature. And now when I group it, then we've got that as part of the sketch. Don's asking if we can change the color of the corrected red line. I don't think so. Maybe. I've never tried. By the time they're corrected, I really don't want to see them. But anyway, it's possible, Don. I'm not sure. It's certainly not a setting that's obvious in the tool itself. It's might be something that you would have to tinker with the tool under the hood. Let's see. When you do create a red line, you'll notice that there is a class called notes redline. So the red line automatically gets generated in that class and assigned to it. So even if that's not sort of part of your default, then it's going to be built in. So you may want to go ahead and anticipating that, create a notes redline class for yourself or have it as part of your settings. And I would recommend editing the attributes so that it's something a little bolder than the default. So that way you can actually draw some other things in the redline class other than using the redline tool, right? And of course, it would help if your attributes palette was used by default. And then it'll all sort of look like red lines. And given that you've got this class, right, you might also want to, in your resource manager, you might also want to create a text style. And I'll duplicate this text style, and might call it a redline text style. And maybe I do a particular font that I don't normally use, or I might make it sort of pop out in some way so that I'm starting to kind of expand the capabilities of this redline idea. And in fact, in the redline class, I could even assign that text style to the class itself, right? So text style, and I'll give it the redline text style to the class. Yep. And so now when I assign that class to my text that's in the redline class, it automatically looks that way, and that really helps everybody sort of notice that. Notice that the tool has also taken that on, so you may want to take that into account, like how the tool is going to deal if your class is, if your text style is too big, things might sort of run all over themselves. And then finally, the last thing to mention with the redline is that when it's time to print, you want to make sure that you turn off the redline class. Otherwise, you're going to have all these markups everywhere. So, that's really important. You might create a little script to turn off red lines and turn that class off so that you don't, rush to send a set of drawings out at the last minute. Don't look at them closely and realize that, contractors and suppliers and clients get to see all of your markups. So that's something to think about and manage. So that's a tool that I actually find really quick. Given that it's problematic printing drawings out, marking them up by hand, handling them safely, and handing them off to somebody else, having this capability to digitally mark up drawings is really quite nice. A couple of other sort of tips I would say is, even though the Redline tool is a Vectorworks tool and it's intended to mark up Vectorworks drawings, I find the annotating PDFs in preview to be really a little clunky, to say the least. So while I haven't done much of this, you could certainly create a blank Vectorworks document and import some PDFs into the document and mark up your PDF in Vectorworks and then export it as a PDF or photographs or whatever. Obviously, the one disadvantage of using Vectorworks as a PDF markup environment is that all of your red lines are going to be in Vectorworks. In other words, your recipient isn't going to be able to turn off the annotations and ignore your markups. So they're sort of all part of the deal. Let me just unmute anybody in case anybody has any questions about the red line. Yeah.
Can you have more than one red line class? Let's say you want to communicate different kinds of things to different people. Like have a red line class for Jeff, another red line class for Phyllis or something. Maybe different colors.
Good, but the Redline tool automatically assigns itself to the Notes Redlines class. So you
Right.
could create new classes like Notes Redlines Jeff, Notes Redlines Phyllis, whatever.
Oh, okay.
But it would, all your Redlines would default to one of those classes, or just the Notes Redlines.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so what would be appropriate there is to, under, you know, go ahead and show the assignee in the Redline object itself, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because by default that's not shown,
Right.
but you can definitely show that, right?
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that would be the
Assigned to again.
intended
Okay.
way to
Got it.
handle that.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. Okay, so the next tool that I want to touch on is project sharing. And it's very difficult for one person to demonstrate project sharing. But the idea with project sharing is that you would be able to assign either particular objects or particular layers in your project file to someone else. And the way that you do that is you, under File, you would activate project sharing. So what happens, as this dialog box demonstrates, is that the type of Vectorworks file that you're working on when you use project sharing is changed into another kind of file called a project file. And that has the extension VWXP. So a Vectorworks drawing that we're all used to using has a project extension of VWX. Project sharing creates a VWXP file, and that's the overall project file. And each individual user has a working file, and that's a VWXW file. So if it's got a P at the end, it's a project file. If it's got a W at the end, it's a working file that's assigned to a particular user. And if it doesn't have either of those, it's just a VWX, then it's just a garden variety of Vectorworks drawing file. Now, when you do that, no one can actually work in the project file itself. So the project file is a kind of it's sort of a meta file, or it's a consolidation of everybody's individual work. But each user, whenever they try to open the project file, it generates a working file for that particular user. So you don't actually directly work in the project file. Each user works in their own working file. And periodically you can save and commit your work, and it gets written to the project file. So there are some networking protocols, SMB and AFP. I'm not a network guy, so I don't remember off the top of my head what those do, but what I know is don't mix them, just like it says, not recommended. I just go with the default. So right now you can see that this is a VWX, it's just a Vectorworks file. And I'm just gonna go next. And you can see that I can create users, right? And by default, it automatically gets my username from my computer username over here. And my full name, it gets from Vectorworks registration. And it gives me administrative privileges, and it assigns me a color. And each user has various levels of permissions, either administrative, which allows you to assign other users, project level, or you can give people layers and resources, or unrestricted access to layers, or restricted, and so forth. So I could add somebody. And I would find their username and their full name, and I would give them a color and permission. And again, I'm in isolation, so it's hard for me to demonstrate this fully. But the username that I would use would be the username that everybody has on their account. So, so if there was a Jeffrey in the office, then you would use their username on their workstation when they log into the workstation. That's how it keeps track of everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up because I'm the only user. And so you can see that now Vectorworks has created a duplicate of this file, and it's called it a VWXW working file. And I can start working in the file, and I can take this group, for example, and go ahead and force select everything, and maybe rotate this by 90 degrees. So as soon as I start to edit something in the drawing, Vectorworks is asking me if I want to check that out. So I can check out an object on a case-by-case basis, in which case I'm going to get a single time I make some sort of a change, which is quickly going to be tedious, right? Or I can automatically check out any objects that are in that layer. So I'm starting to work in this layer floor 1, and having done that, I can check it out. So now that layer belongs to me, and so I can type a little note, you know, hey guys, I'm working in this layer today. Text me if you need anything. 2555555. Now you know my text number. So there we go. So now, having done that, I can do anything I want to anything in this layer, right? So I can move the furniture around, I can delete it, and it's not going to prompt me every time to make some. I go to another layer, say the roof 2 layer. Let's change that structural member from a 5.5 to 7.25, right? And now it's going to again prompt me and says, hey, I see you're working in the roof 2 layer. Do you want to just take control of the entire layer, preventing other people from doing it? So it's really smart in that it doesn't allow 2 people to, well, it would allow you if you just check objects out on a case-by-case, but it allows you to sort of take control of an entire layer to prevent 2 people from simultaneously working on the same file and working on the same things in the same file and working sort of against each other. So the best way that this works is if you split up your project into layers and you assign individual layers to individual users, and they have temporary control of those layers by checking them out. So it's message, so I'll hit OK. And so I can do whatever work that I do, and then when I'm done, I just go and save and commit. So what that does is it releases all of my layers, and it saves the work on to the Vectorworks project file. And then having done that, I can go ahead and close out my work. So in this case, I'm just going to close and release because I don't want to, I want to discard all my changes because very happy with the way things were before I started messing with it, right? And oh, there's screen sharing is stopped because my file closed. So that's cool. I'll just go back and open that file again. So when I'm finally done with everything, so I'm back in the file, I didn't save, I didn't commit to any of my changes, so I didn't mess anything up. So you'll notice that now I tried to open the project file, and in fact, it's always going to give it to me as a working file. So when everybody has done their work at the end of the day or the end of the week or the end of the month, or whatever time increment works for you, and after you've saved and committed, so what you can do is you can then do a save as, or save a copy as, and save that file back to the original drawing file. So I'll delete my name. And you can see that I can save it as a Vectorworks working file or a project file or a drawing. So I'm just going to save it back to a Vectorworks drawing. So I'm taking my working file, which is I've saved and everybody who's worked has saved and committed. So everything got written back to the project file. And so when I open my working file, I'm sort of looking at my version of the project file. And I'll go ahead and save that, my working file, back to a Vectorworks drawing. I'll save it, and then I will open it. Image. So you can see that now I'm in this file, and it's just back to a regular Vectorworks file. So at the end of the day, when everybody's done all their collaborative work, you can go ahead and save it back down to a garden variety Vectorworks file, drawing file, and go on your merry way. And then maybe a week later, you need to work on it as a team again and activate project sharing, and there you go. Now, every once in a while, things will get a little dodgy, things kind of collide with each other. In case, what we found is we're using Google Drive as sort of our virtual server. And so what will happen is we're all working on the same project at the same time with project sharing, that not keeping up with the syncing as quickly as we'd like. And so we start to get, it gets a little glitchy. And project sharing works with Google Drive, but it probably works better with Dropbox, which sadly we don't use. So, and it also, of course, works with Vectorworks cloud services naturally, and probably a couple of other sharing platforms as well. So when things start to get a little strange and it seems to be buggy, what we would do is everybody would just save and commit. So everything gets committed back to the main project file. Somebody would open that project file, it would become a working file for them, and they would save that back to a Vectorworks drawing file. We would kind of file away all of the project files and working files in a little folder somewhere in case we need to get back to it, but we would then sort of restart the process. So really, project sharing works best when you've got really close-knit collaboration. You've got multiple people who need to work in the same file or the same building or the same project, and you've set up your file where things are layered fairly logically and extensively, and that way you can kind of give people layers, one or more layers to work with. So that's kind of the quick high-level overview. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody in case anyone has any questions.
Well, I do again. One thing I missed out entirely, what exactly does it mean to check out in this case? We're checking out, you know.
Yeah, so it's a bit like you know, it's a bit like a library. Like when I check out a layer, what that means is that that layer is assigned to me, and only I can make changes to that layer.
Oh, at that time.
At that time, until I commit and release.
Got it.
Or release without committing.
Makes sense.
So if you were to try to edit the object in the same layer, you would get an error statement. Vectorworks would say, you know, Francois has that layer right now.
Got it.
And so you can't work on it.
No, I understand. So the other question is, so you talked about saving, you make, it automatically makes the work file, somebody works on the work file and they commit and you save it as a new drawing file. So that means you've got, go ahead.
You could, yeah, you don't have to do that. You could keep individual, you know, we would keep individual users would have their user files, their working file, their VWXW
Right.
for days, and there would be a project file for days. But at a certain point, it makes sense to consolidate everything, bring it all back to a single, you know, everybody saves and commits their work, and then you could save that as a regular Vectorworks drawing, a VWX file. And then later, if you need to do project sharing again, you would reactivate project sharing. So it's kind of, you know, you're probably not using project sharing all the time for the same file. You're periodically closing it down and then starting it up again.
I see. So, but this, in either case, it's this new, when you save it to this new VWX file, that's a duplicate of the original model file.
Correct.
Right. And so at which point you say, okay, now let's say you're the boss, you say, okay, now I need to review everybody's edits and so on and so forth, what they did in their files. So do you look at their individual work files, or do the compiled one and the VWX, or, you know, how do you know what everybody's been doing? And you just go around?
Well, every time, so if you and I are working on a project together,
right.
When you save and commit, what happens is all the changes that you made to your layer are then transferred over and changed on the VWP project file, file. And so I am periodically under file sharing, under project sharing, there's a refresh. It's grayed out right now because I'm no longer in
I got it.
shared.
Yeah.
And so now I can refresh. And so I'm not looking at your individual file. I mean, I could, it's probably not a good idea. What I'm looking at is sort of the composite of everyone's work. I'm looking at the project file, but I never actually open that file. My working file is sort of a clone of the project file where I can see the whole project, but I only get to edit those parts that are assigned to me or checked out.
So what about if you wanted to comment or redline somebody's work on one of their work files that gets put back into your composite and communicate to them? Nice, but I'd rather it look like that. Is that a way to do it?
Sure, sure. Yeah, you would just tell them, hey, save and, you probably don't want to redline somebody while they're working.
No, but,
I mean,
yeah.
So you would tell them save and commit, and you would go to the layer that they worked on because they've saved and committed, so they've released that layer. and you would just go ahead and redline directly on that layer.
Got
And
it.
then you would, you know, email them or text them or call them or shout across the room or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Not these days, but and then you would tell them, hey, I redlined that second floor plan that you were working on. Why don't you go have a look?
Yeah. Okay. Great.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, that's great because I have other things to work on, to move on to. So I'll mute everybody and move on. So there's another way of sharing information with specifically Vectorworks files other than project sharing, which is a little less full-featured than project sharing. It's not as sophisticated, but it's also less prone to potential conflicts and syncing issues. And that's referencing. So referencing is appropriate if there's real clear division of labor. I mean, the nice thing about project sharing is it's very flexible. Like today I could be working on the site plan, and tomorrow I could be working on the roof plan, and it's just whatever layers I check out, those are what I'm, you know, working on. With referencing, what you're doing is you have actually an entirely separate Vectorworks file, and one or more of its layers are referenced into the target document. So for those of us who, you know, remember the days of layer links, referencing is like a sort of a super layer link. So back to this detail sheet. And actually, if you click on that detail sheet, you can see that this is a referenced viewport. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this, and we'll go ahead and create a new one just so everybody can see. And yes, so there's a question about referencing sheet layers, and yes, you can reference and project share sheet layers as well. All right, so over here I've got a layer. It's pretty much blank except for the red lines that I just made for us today. I'm just going to delete those. Okay, so I've got a layer that's entirely blank and in sort of what I think of as my master document. And somebody else is going to be working on details. Or maybe somebody else is working on a site plan or whatever. And so I'm going to go ahead and under view, I'm going to create a viewport. So there it is. And I will go ahead and create that viewport on my design layer. So it's not a sheet layer viewport, it's a design layer viewport. And I am going to select as a source an external document. So I'll go ahead and choose this file, details. There it is, and hit OK. And when I do that, that is the source file. Now that file could contain just one layer, or it might have 50 layers. So I'm going to choose which layers. Oh, it turns out it only has one. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this one detail layer and hit OK. And display planar objects and screen objects because this is all 2D stuff. And hit all right. And there we go. So there are all the details that are, you know, carefully laid out. So from this design layer, I've got a single viewport that has all of my details, but I also have a sheet layer that has all my details. There it is. So each of these is just an individual viewport, and I've got them as 16 individual viewports or 20, not one viewport, and that's so that I can number each of them individually and put a drawing title in each one individually. But other than the drawing title, all of the notes, all of the drawing, all that happens over here in this viewport, which is referenced from an external file. And in fact, I can go back and just double click on this viewport, and I can navigate back to the referenced file. So this is the, I'm not sure if you all can see, let's do a new share. There we go. All right, so so they look exactly the same. So it's a little confusing because this is the native or the original drawing, but then over here, here's the file where all of that's been referenced. A couple of nice things about referencing viewports is that, or referencing external files, is that I can go ahead and have a system of classes in one document, and all of the classes are contained within the viewport. They don't spill out into the broader document. So, for example, in the overall document, I might have some classes here that they don't have to have the same classes at all. So this referencing is very useful if you've got a DWG with an entirely different class and or layer system from a consultant, like a site plan, survey, or a civil engineer perhaps who's given you a DWG. You can import that DWG into Vectorworks and then reference it, or you can even just directly reference a DWG itself without going through Vectorworks. So unlike project sharing, where you're sort of closely collaborating, everybody's kind of in the kitchen together, working around each other, weaving around different layers. With referencing, there's a much broader. It's not bidirectional. I mean, you could set it up to be, but it's not inherently bidirectional, and everybody can have their own classes and layers, and you don't have to worry about importing other people's classes. And if you give the referenced file the same name and keep it in the same path, then your collaborator can go ahead and update their work, and so long as they don't change the name, you can just refresh the viewport. So over here in your navigation menu, right, on the last tab of navigation are your references. So here that reference is shown, and it would tell you that it's up to date. And if it's not up to date, it would show up red, and you would know that you could update it. So more one-directional, a little bit more, referencing has a sturdier little child-proof cap on it that makes it a little bit less problematic. You do want to go ahead and be careful about your paths. So let me go to my organization palette and go to references. So there's that reference, right? And this a little smaller, there we go. So there's that reference, and I can go ahead and edit it. So maybe the file gets moved or it gets renamed. I can just update it. I can save your reference location, my reference location, as an absolute path, so it would always go to a particular place and look for the file. or I can have it as a path that's relative to the current document. So as I said before, in our office, we use Google Drive. So if you're using Dropbox or Google Drive or Box or Vectorworks Cloud Services or some sort of cloud-based file sharing, you want to probably have a path relative to the current document so that it always looks for it in the respective location. If you give it an absolute path, then it's going to look for it on, you know, XYZ's machine or the server, and you may not be in the office. You may not be anywhere near the server. So relative paths tend to be preferable, but not always, kind of depends. And then under settings here, there is a layer import method for referencing, which is kind of a first generation, old version of referencing. And what that does is it creates a kind of a copy and paste of the entire layer into your Vectorworks document, which will be italicized. And that was sort of the first version of referencing, and it's probably has its uses, but I think that's mostly a legacy workflow. I think it's far preferable to use design layer viewports. But that's, you know, your mileage may vary on that. So questions about referencing versus project sharing or referencing in general? I've unmuted everybody.
Well, referencing, is this a good tool to use, for example, if you had a set of standard details or standard building department details and all that sort of stuff that's in a catalog file, and then for each project, you can pick and choose what of those details you're going to use from your catalog and reference it into your current file?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, referencing also, when you import a PDF, you can also reference the PDF as a path, so that you know, let's say you're an architect and your structural engineer has some, you know, some kind of standard boilerplate shear wall diagram or shear wall details, for example, that for some reason you want to include in your set. You could reference PDF without having access to the DWG, for example. But yeah, you could use referencing for, you know, we typically use it most often for referencing site plans or surveys, because surveyors use a completely different class system than we do. And again, as I mentioned, there's kind of a little membrane around the viewport that doesn't let classes kind of get out into your file. But also details are really anything where somebody might work fairly independently, whether it's details or a different consultant.
So the other question would be, if we're doing this, well, the standard details, for example, let's say you draw a detail that has a certain manufacturer's product in it that you've copied over, blah, blah, blah. And you've done, you know, 4 projects already with that detail. And now you're up to a new project, but that manufacturer's changed a component of that and you want to change your standard detail. Can you do it so that it only goes from that moment forward? So in other words, you change it and you need to access those old projects. You don't want to change those details because they're already built and they're as-built. So does that make sense? In other words,
yeah, like right. How do you ensure against inadvertently updating something that you don't actually want to update with the new detail? Yeah. So what I would probably do in that case, Bill, is I would duplicate the detail file and I would name the old one, like maybe with a date, you know, or like, you know, prior to 2020 or, you know, a year. So it's like standard details 2019, 2020.
Yep.
And then, you know, and then again here in navigation references, you could edit that. You could edit that reference file, and do you see how it's showing the relative path? I could browse and find the 2020 version of those details. And so long as I didn't move everything around, but just changed some profiles, then it would just essentially swap them out.
That makes sense. So archive the original detail files that you need to archive for the past and create new ones for that change and reference those from here henceforth. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, thanks. All right. Anybody, any other questions, or move on to a couple of other things? We've got about another 20 minutes or so, 20 or 30.
I think that's it.
All right. There are other ways to, share your work, obviously. One of them is web views. So one thing that I could do is I could get into some sort of a model view, and under File, I could export that as a web view. I could either use the custom logo, the Vectorworks logo, or choose my own custom logo. I can specify the render quality, all visible objects or selected objects only. I tend to prefer to just create a saved view that has the objects that I want turned on and the ones that I don't want turned off. And then I could either save it on Vectorworks cloud storage or in my Dropbox or local storage or temporary cloud storage. I tend to put it in Vectorworks cloud storage and then get a shareable link. And then I just hit export and it processes it. And I'll just go ahead and save that. Now, sometimes the first time I export, it doesn't take very long, but the first time I export, it doesn't come back and give me this shareable link. Oh no, there it is, it's getting it. Sorry, it's just taking a while. Well, all right, while it's doing that, it will come up and it will give you a link, and you can share that with somebody, and then they will be able to pull up this model on their web browser, which is why it's called a web view. And so from their web browser, they'll be able to navigate the model. So it's a great device for sharing a model comprehensively with somebody who isn't a Vectorworks user, like a client, or you need to make a presentation. They can either drive around the model, spin it around by dragging their mouse from their desktop. There we go. I'll go ahead and copy that link. And then I'll go to my web browser and paste it in place and give you guys a new share. There we go. So there's the web view. And it's going to take a minute to render. And we've talked about web views before in past meetings, so this might be a bit of a review, or maybe some of you are already doing this. So it's composing the model and showing it, and I can sort of drag it around, right? I can pan. If I'm viewing this on a tablet or a phone, I can just move the tablet or the phone around in order to navigate, or I can click over here and change to a walkthrough mode, which I didn't do. Okay, I think that'll work. No, it's not being very responsive, probably because of the Zoom. But I have had some clients sort of have difficulty sort of just like I'm having right now, navigating through the web view, particularly from their desktop. It's a little bit easier on a tablet, actually. Works better on a tablet. So, and the other thing to mention about web views is that because your client can, or whoever you're sharing it with, can navigate through the whole model, they get to see all of your dirty laundry. So if you've got like some parts of the model that are incomplete, or you're still working on it or whatever, and you don't necessarily want to show the sausage being made, well, they're going to see the sausage. So just be aware that when you're sharing the model that way, you're sharing the whole model. And so be comfortable with that. An alternative to web view is creating an animation. And we recently talked about that in a meeting, but sort of worth refreshing. So in 2020, Vectorworks changed how path and orbit animations were done. So I've got this one right here. I'll just go ahead and delete it. So what I would do if I wanted to create an orbital animation is I might select a few objects that are the center of that animation. I like to go for roofs because they tend to cover the whole project. And then I would, under model, create a path orbit. And I can rotate about the center of the selection, so it'll take my roofs and sort of center that orbit on the roofs. And when I do that, let me go to top plan view here. When I do that, it creates this circular object that is, in fact, an animation path. And by default, it will start the view over here at 12 o'clock. So if I want to rotate that view and start from a different position, like maybe
Francois?
7 o'clock, yes.
I think we're only seeing the web view on my screen right now. I can't
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You can maybe try refreshing your share, and sometimes that'll work.
Yeah. All right, are you seeing my Vectorworks file here? I'll just stop the share and then I'll start again.
There it is.
Yeah. So I selected the roofs. I created an orbit path animation. It creates this circle here, and that little triangle thing at 12 o'clock. That's my camera. So I'm going to rotate the whole object by 210 degrees clockwise. All right. So then it'll be over here, and so now from the object info palette, I can just activate the camera view, and then it shows me what the camera sees. So that might be a little too high, so I'll go back to top plan view. I don't really have to, but then I'll just move that that path itself down by 5 feet. That's better. Okay, and so from there I can go ahead and create a movie. And I can specify the duration, the frames per second, the rendering and how it renders, a standard size, whether it's 720 or 1080p, and then it'll create this path animation, save the movie. Call it animation. So it's going to, to generate an animation of this model, it's going to take about a minute. I recommend OpenGL for time with shadows turned on rather than, final quality RenderWorks. Although sometimes you need to do a final quality, but then you expect it'll take longer to render. And when it's done rendering, then it'll just give me an MOV file that I can upload to the cloud and send somebody a link, or I can attach in an email, maybe, probably a little too large. Okay, so it's done doing that. So I'm just going to go ahead and navigate over to it and share it with you. And so, this is a pretty low res animation, just to kind of get it quickly. And obviously it's not drivable. It's pretty simple. You're just watching a movie, so anything that isn't in the scene, you're just not going to get to see. So depending on what your objectives are, it might be better to share an animation, a link to one of your animations rather than a web view, or you may prefer to do a web view, or some combination. Let's see, I got chat. So let's see, any questions about web views and
Yes.
path animations?
Yes, about the animation. I cannot for the life of me figure out how to raise the orbit path, but put the camera angle of the entire thing down. I know how to one.
Nope.
Can I not do that?
I haven't figured it out either.
Oh my gosh. I just thought I was being stupid, but
didn't we talk to, didn't they do it in the last month's? I think so. I think you showed us. I think you go to a. I think
they tried and they didn't have any success with it either.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, that's
what I would probably do, Gail, is do let me see what screen.
I think if you go to a right view, not like necessarily an isometric, but like a right view.
Yep.
Yeah, and then you can aim it up and down.
But like, it only changes that one instance.
You're gonna have to do it for every blue node there. You have to do it for every single one of those along the path.
I think it's easier to save your drawing as a 2019 and use the old style. That's what I ended up doing.
Huh.
I like the 2019 better than this one. I don't like this one at all.
Open camera in new plane. So basically the camera always looks at the horizon, no matter what height you're at.
No, you can aim it. You just have to do it at each one of those blue nodes around the path.
All right, so that way it can go up and down.
If I play it, then it goes up.
Jeez.
And then it goes down.
So it's more flexible, more complicated to enact.
Yes.
So
yeah,
first
Gail,
of all,
it's a feature.
I'll try to remember that when I get frustrated next time.
Yeah, yeah. Matt, that's a good point. Yeah, you do need to do it individually with each camera.
Oh dear. Okay.
But it melds it together into an even flow, right?
Right.
Because each one of those points is not going to jerk up and down or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah. So another question just about using these things. For example, on your office webpage for the public to view to think about hiring you, do you ever use either the web view of a model or the animation of any of your projects so people can have a better look than just a static photo or image on their screen? Or is there a reason to not do that?
I used to do that years and years ago, but I personally, I tend to think that an appealing image, like I almost don't want to overwhelm people with too much detail. Like I don't really want to give them a model that they can drive around, and that's just too much to think about. I'd rather they just like, oh, that's a really great project. Let's call these guys. I don't know. That's just kind of my
It's a
marketing.
possibility, although it sounds to me like that an animation would be a safer bet because you're controlling what they're looking at. So it would be start as a static image, but then a click would then suddenly spin the image around. So
I mean, I could imagine that, if you did, let's say you had a model, like, maybe you do a lot of kitchens, for example, and you had a really beautifully detailed model of a kitchen that never got built, and you could just do that as a web view or a Pano 3D and post it for people to kind of drive around in. That I personally, I would be more inclined to do something that was more limited that way rather than an entire building.
Right. I just think some people are really impressed with what's available to be done in the computer. Static image anybody can do, but then see animation that, wow, you can do that. I've heard people say that. They're very impressed with that. I mean, still, in 10 years, probably everybody will expect it, but still, I think it's new to some people.
That also cuts both ways. Like sometimes people just have like unreasonable expectations of what you can do.
Good. Hey, can I call you back? I'm in the middle of a meeting.
Unmute yourself.
Okay. Okie doke. So let's see. I just have a few more minutes. So there's some couple of things I wanted to also talk about in terms of working together. So importing and exporting.
You want to mute us all again?
DWGs. Oh, sure.
By the way, a pro tip is to mute yourself and then hit the space bar to temporarily unmute.
Nice. Let's see. Got a chat. Let's see. Andrew, I'm sorry, Matt, can you see my detail sheet there? Is that what you're seeing?
Yes. Looking
Okay,
good.
great. Fantastic. Thank you, sir. Other file formats that I can import and export to, obviously, I could export as a DWG. So now I've opened the detail sheet. Let me share that with you. Right. And so I could go ahead and maybe turn that into go to black and white mode and export that as a PDF, right? Obviously, I'm sure we've all done that about 1 million times. So go ahead and export my details. Great. Or I could also export that as a DWG. very useful to be able to export as flattened 2D graphics, particularly if I'm have some kind of a mix of planar and 3D objects. I can just flatten everything as a 2D graphic, which would be something I would probably do for something like a detail sheet, right? Export my hatches and fills and so forth. And having done all that, just export that as details. So there we go. So instead of using a work group reference here, I'll just go ahead and delete that work group reference. I could use a PDF, for example. So, you know, looks like I've drafted all these details. They're just a PDF. And of course, when I'm importing PDFs, I want to be sure, in most cases, to snap to geometry. So that I could do something like dimension that thickness of that wall, for example. And because my sheet layer viewport is referencing my detailed PDFs, you know, once I print, there's no way to distinguish PDF details versus Vectorworks details. They all look, you know, nicely drafted. And for that matter, instead of a PDF, I could import a DWG, or I could let's go ahead and import a single DWG, go back to my details, hit OK. And instead of importing it directly, I could reference it just like I reference a Vectorworks file with a relative path. So some of these solids just came through as black, so I might need to tinker with some of my import settings. I don't know what happened to it. But oftentimes when I'm importing a DWG, what I prefer to do is to start with a completely blank document. So I just opened a new document here, and let me, oh, it's not showing up. Something to share. So let me stop sharing and then restart it. There we go. And so I'll go ahead and import DWG, but not reference it. Right. And then I could go ahead and save that. And then reference that file, because now it's a Vectorworks file, back into my main file. So I've got some options here in terms of how I, what file formats I want to share, what I can reference, and use a mix of DWGs, PDFs, and so forth, which can sort of facilitate working with others. So I'm just going to close with a couple of quick little tips, some things that might be useful as you're working remotely. One thing is that you may want to tag your layers or classes. So for example, if you go to classes, you can see that all of your classes have a description and a tag, and you can create a list of tags. So starting to have more description of your classes, particularly if they're non-standard Vectorworks classes, may make it easier for somebody who's working remotely from you to understand how you like to use a particular class. So that's a useful thing to consider. Another thing is when you're annotating your drawings, something that I just became aware of when we started working remotely, because previously that was not an issue. So we use a fair amount of callouts. And if I look at that callout, it didn't find the database for that callout. And so I'll just go ahead and I'm just going to choose one at random. Okay, but once you have a callout database pointed selected, there's this little gear over here. And if you click on that, you can choose whether you connect to your database as a path or as an absolute or relative path. So if you're working remotely, you want your callouts to be relative paths, obviously, because while your notes database may live on Google Drive or Dropbox or Vectorworks Cloud Services or wherever, obviously it's syncing to a local machine, and so you're really just seeing a constantly updated copy of it, not the file itself. So a relative path is important there. Likewise, when you're creating a callout, I don't know that it has a path choice right here. So that's just something to be aware of. Make sure that your callout database is relative, not absolute. And then lastly, one thing we've been working on is updating our templates. Over time, you get kind of complacent, and when you start a new project, you crib things from old projects. So this is a really good time to create fresh templates of your work, kind of cull out old things you don't need, add new things that you've been wanting to get to. And it's particularly important as people use stories more and more to kind of build those into templates, because stories can be a bit of a hassle to set up, and there currently isn't a way to import, that I'm aware of, a story from one file to the next. So you want to build those into your template. I've got a couple more minutes on our time, and I just wanted to unmute anybody in case anyone had any last questions. Any questions? Huh. Well, great. Thanks all for attending.
Thank you.
Sorry about dropping a shared screen here and there. Matt, thanks for the pro tip and for being my wingman. And I hope everybody is well and stays well, and you know, probably we'll do this again next month.
It was great. I look forward to it.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Francois.
Thanks, Francois.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.